and welcome to a, depending on your perspective, especially sweet or especially sour edition of Ben's Junk. And if you're one of those people that really hates Christmas music, this is going to be really sour, and you might just want to skip this one entirely. But if you have some taste for it, just go along with me for a while here. This is going to be one of my little loose geeky rambles. So what else is new? So anyway, I want to discuss my favorite Christmas albums in no particular order, and some that I think are just noteworthy. And there's some weird ones, there's some deep cuts in here. But we're past Thanksgiving now. I think I'm at liberty to do this. And I don't consider myself a great connoisseur of Christmas music, but I do own the better share of a U-Haul box full of just Christmas CDs, so obviously I have some experience with it. But let's just ease into the season here with a nice leisurely little ramble. So anyway, I will have the regular Christmas episode later in the month, and as always, I try and make that the Christmas party you actually want to go to, as opposed to the one you have to go to. But let's get down to business here. So I think I can safely say this is my favorite Christmas album, and it's so rare you find a Christmas album that holds together as some kind of cohesive work. And I don't think this is perfect. There's still a couple of cuts I don't really care for, but the batting average is far better than most. So yeah, and the good stuff is just absolutely brilliant in my opinion. But yeah, from 1963, A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Les Records. Also known as A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Spector, or Phil Spector's Christmas album. And if you can pull yourself back from Phil Spector, you know, the guy does deserve the crap that he gets. But as far as I'm concerned, the Ronettes, the Crystals, Bobby Sox and the Blue Jeans, Darlene Love, and all the great musicians that played on this, some of whom became famous themselves later on, like Leon Russell, do not deserve the crap. And if you can just take this as a pop record, and a very well-crafted pop record, it's well worth it. And in some cases, it's really the only instance of some of the really common Christmas tunes that I really accept. Like Sleigh Ride. It's the only straight rendition of Winter Wonderland that I'll accept. Otherwise, they're all parodies. But then again, my favorite thing on this is the one and only original. And if you know your rock history, you know which one that is and who sings it. So anyway, I have owned 3 copies of this thing now, and this is the most recent. So this is the original 1963 artwork here, but this disc is from within the last decade on the Sundays label. One of the better reissue labels out there, if one that tends to overcompress their CDs. But I'd love an original 1963 LP of this thing, but those things just fetch stupid money, even trashed. Largely because as much of a staple as we think of this as at this point, this bombed when it first came out. And it didn't help that this happened to come out on the same day as the JFK assassination. So I just don't think too many people were in the mood for buying Christmas records that year. But when it got reissued the first time in the early 70s, it started to sell. And over time, it's sold better and better. And nowadays, it's one of the best-selling Christmas records and one of the most reliable ones. And this finally did make its way into the top 40 in the last few years. Of course, at any given time, there's at least a few oldies in the top 40 because oldies are kind of outselling a lot of the new stuff, and rightly so, but that's another discussion as far as I'm concerned. Now, I mentioned Sundays did a good job with this one. It's on white vinyl, which normally I would turn my nose up at. I normally do not like colored vinyl or marble vinyl because it looks pretty, but it's usually very cheap vinyl stock and very impure vinyl stock. But they got a good pure white vinyl stock for this. But I do have a bit of a complaint. It's pretty obvious they used a digital source for the music itself. It sounds out of place. It sounds wrong to me on vinyl. I really wish they would have backed it up to tape first and transferred that. But Yeah, that's just one of Benny Boy's nutty little things. No one else probably even notice. But yeah, they really did their darndest to properly recreate the back, save for any more modern stuff that they just kind of had to add in there. So yeah, this is the most recent copy of it. My first copy was on CD, and I've still got it as part of the Phil Spector Back to Mono box set. And I've had it on cassette, and this tape has appeared on archive, this LP too for that matter. But when I did the tape baking episode back in 2017, this was one of my specimens. And unfortunately, it never really did heal, if you will, well enough for me to get a good straight one-shot pass at it. I was able to transfer it, but I would play for a while and then it would start to take a dump on the heads of my tape deck and I'd have to rewind and pick it up again. And I eventually got through the whole album and I stitched it all back together on the computer. But yeah, if you've seen my tape baking episode, you already kind of know the drama surrounding this one. Now, if you haven't seen that one, you might be wondering why I've got this cassette here and why I would want to transfer it when I've already got the vinyl and the CD. Well, it's because sometime in the 70s, I think early 70s, it got a stereo mix. This was only mono back in 1963. Thing is, it's more of a novelty on stereo than anything else, because this was 1963 and this was recorded on 3-track equipment, which in the case of a big production like a Phil Spector thing, it basically meant 1 track of vocals, 1 track of all the orchestral stuff, strings and horns, and 1 of the rock band, if you will, guitars, keyboards, bass, drums. And so when you try and make a stereo mix out of that, it sounds a little disjointed. It sounds a little detached. But yeah, that's what's on this tape. And that stereo mix was flying around as late as the mid-'80s. And this cassette issue is from '81. And this particular tape is just goo at this point, but I just can't seem to throw it out. Now, if you are looking for stereo versus mono, yeah, that is Phil on the cover. If you do find one of the 70s and 80s issues of this album with this cover, and Phil has a button in his beard that says mono or back to mono, it's the mono mix. Usually, it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally. And if it's been airbrushed out, you've got the stereo mix. So it's unfortunately that's not, definitive, but I'd say 80% of the time that holds true. So if you're, that kind of record geek, you hopefully have an idea of what you're getting. So anyway, the other biggie, and one that I am kind of ashamed to say I didn't give a proper airing until just this last year. Of course, I picked up this LP on the Christmas thrifting episode last year, I guess it would have been. And this is the 3rd copy of this I've ever owned, but I just never really gave it that proper airing. I first had it on cassette. It was my mom's old cassette. And that thing has such a god-awful mono reprocessed for stereo thing going on that I just find it unlistenable. It's like underwater and weirdly EQ'd and stuff. And then somewhere down the line, I got a CD of it in the thrift store bin, and it's one you can usually find pretty easily in the thrift store bin around the holidays. And I guess I just never gave it the full attention. And then last year, I threw this on. I still had my stuff from the thrifting episode kicking around. I was here in Archive HQ. I was doing some other stuff. I was cleaning. So I decided, what the hell, it's a couple of days before Christmas, I'll throw this on my turntable. And I was pleasantly surprised. There are some songs that are just kind of meh on there, but nothing that made me want to skip ahead either. And I was surprised at how many songs that I've already pulled, like for my iPod. Yes, I still use an iPod. And just how much of it has kind of fallen into the pop culture lexicon and we don't even really recognize it. Now, as for this particular LP, this is a fairly early 12-inch copy. I don't think this is from any later than about 1959. Now, of course, Benny Boy always has his little complaints. So I'm notoriously Mr. Original. I'm not a fan generally of re-recordings and remixes and stuff. But when you hear Bing singing White Christmas, those rare occasions you hear it on the radio anymore, it's almost never the original recording. And this is not the original recording. So he did it in 1942, right at just about the height of World War II. And it was such a huge hit at the time that, there was no tape yet really in America. And they had to use that master copy over and over and over. And eventually the thing just was toast. So in 1947, I believe, Bing, by this point, he had tape. Of course, he was one of the big investors in tape just after World War II, audio tape and videotape. He went back and re-recorded it, and that's what's on this album and what has made it to every subsequent reissue and on just about every Christmas compilation that features Bing's White Christmas. Now, the original 1942 version, of course, there's lots of old 78s of it that are usually trashed. But it has had at least one reissue, and a decent one, and it's on the original 2-disc, now that's what I call Christmas compilation, 2-disc set here in the US. And it's from a new old stock, or as close as possible as they could get to, 78. And they, circumstances, taken into consideration, they did a good job. So if you can find that, and I think it is available for download and streaming, you can get the 1942 version, but it's not on here. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure the contents of this album went up in the Universal Fire, Universal Records, the big old conglomerate back in 2008. So I don't think we're ever going to see a remaster of this thing either, unfortunately. All right, so here's one that I don't really care for as a whole work, but the songs that I do like, I just love. So Emmylou Harris, Light of the Stable. And I'm of that ilk that first heard her alongside Graham Parsons, even though that was well before my time. I was, I had my country rock period, and I still like country rock even now. But the title cut of this first came out as a single in 1975, and then I think got reissued in 79, and then this full album in 80. And actually the cover to the original single is way nicer than this, and thankfully that's what's on most of the CD copies these days. But this is a 1980 promo copy that I found in a thrift store bin ages ago. But the parts of it that I like, I absolutely love. And I do have this on CD. Now, if you do get the CD, the Rhino CD, the most common one, she did go back and add some new songs and stuck them in the running order of this. So if you're a purist, it might not work too well. But by the same token, it's most of the same musicians. Her voice sounds the same. It sounds like it was even on the same equipment or damn close to it. So it doesn't feel wrong in context. So it does have that going for it. All right, so I've only got one more LP here, and then we're going to go all CD and cassette. And this is the first of the weird culty ones. And I actually used this in lieu of my cardboard box on, I think it was the first Christmas episode I did. So, Paul Revere and the Raiders, A Christmas Present and Past from 1967, and my very, very water-damaged cover. The disc is in great condition, though. So, this is really, it's a satirical album. It's kind of one you want to put on when you're in a bit of a nasty mood around the holidays. You had a bad day, people were being jerks out on the road and stuff, that sort of record. And it's noteworthy in that it's almost entirely original, and there's some public domain stuff on there too. And it also winds up being a bit of a problem in the long haul. So if you are a purist, you're going to have to find an original LP of this thing. Because this has been on cassette and on CD at least twice now. But somebody at Columbia didn't want to pay royalties. So between most of the songs, there's these little interludes with this Salvation Army band playing, out of tune, as one would expect. But some of the little snippets they play are of copyrighted songs, still copyrighted today, like I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus. So when it finally did find its way to cassette and CD, Columbia just chopped those parts out. And also, if memory serves, this is the original Columbia CD from the early 90s. But anyway, if memory serves, on the last cut of this, on the CD, it gets faded out almost a minute early because there's a really long kazoo solo, which it's weird, but it's not a copyright problem per se. But they do quote, I think it's a bit of Hello Dolly in there. So they didn't want that to be a problem, so they faded it out early. And so, yeah, I did have to go back and burn a CD. Now, my 2017 date on this is outdated. I have since done another pass on it on my direct drive turntable with my good cartridge, my good Japanese high-end cartridge by my standards. And so, yeah, I do have a copy of the full thing on CD, and I did a little homebrew remaster, but, nothing too special. It's still obviously a needle drop. Now, having said that, as far as my iPod goes, the songs that I extracted from this for my iPod, none of them got mangled on the CD, so I actually used the CD for my source on that. But yeah, just one of those really frustrating things. But if you're into, this kind of predates Monty Python, but if you like that kind of brand of humor, or if you're familiar with the Bonzo Dog Band, the British group Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, it's that brand of humor here. All right, I've got a big old stack of CDs to go through here and a stray cassette, and it's all over the map. So we're gonna just careen from one style to another here. So let's just roll through it and see what happens. So this first one I may take a little flack for, but let me plead my case here. The Carpenters Christmas Portrait, and I'm specifically referring to the expanded version from 1984, which is on CD. I think it's the only one that's been on CD. So the Carpenters had an existing album called Christmas Portrait, but after Karen Carpenter died in '83, Richard went back and expanded the hell out of it. And he really made something completely new out of it, as far as I'm concerned. So it's a very long end product, 70 minutes plus, but at the same time, it's an experience. It's really, what do you want to call it? Like almost in a way, a Pink Floyd sort of thing, even though it's not psychedelic. Let me put it this way, it's the kind of album that you turn out the lights at night, put on the headphones, and just let it take you. So in this case, you've got some very lengthy classical medleys, like 8-9 minutes, and it just rolls right into some of the existing pop stuff, and it just weaves in and out. Almost everything segues, and it's really just this great trip of an album. So if you're willing to put in the time and effort, it is one that, in my opinion, is well worth the effort. Now, this next one is not a favorite at all, but I figured I'd just bring it out because I'm allegedly related to this artist somehow. But going into opera mode here, Giancarlo Menotti, Amol and the Night Visitors. And damned if I know how I'm related to him, but yeah, I guess I have that going for me. Now, I'm not an opera person, but this just sounds weird to me. I mean, musically it sounds, fine, but Menotti was ultimately American, and it's in English, and it's just weird hearing American English opera. But this does have its fans, and There was a TV broadcast of this, which still kind of makes the circuit. There's copies of it on YouTube and stuff. So yeah, I figured I would just bring it out. Just, when else am I going to do it? All right, let's truly shift gears here. Let's go into absolute tasteless mode now. So, A John Waters Christmas. And I really only brought this out for one song, and of course that glorious artwork. What else would you expect out of John Waters? But the classic opening cut, or close to it. Excuse me, track 5. Here Comes Fatty Claus. As in, here comes Fatty Claus and his sack of And I think that's the whole reason it has the parental advisory sticker on it. I haven't put this in some time, but it seems like that's the only thing with profanity on it. Otherwise, it being John Waters, it's kind of a mix of very blunt comedy stuff and total cheese. Like it has the infamous Little Cindy single on here. It's got some Tiny Tim. And it being John Waters, being Mr. 60s Baltimore himself, there's some classic R&B on here too to give it a little more weight and a little more variety, bit of a break between all the silly stuff. So yeah, but yeah, that one song just merited its inclusion. All right, so since we're doing the weird stuff, this next one, Sergei got some pretty good mileage out of in the 2 Christmas Catacomb of Classics shows I've let him do. I don't think there's going to be a third because he's pretty much exhausted my weird Christmas collection. But yeah, the American Song Poem Christmas. Daddy, is Santa really 6'4"? And, of course, my personal favorite on this is from The Sisterhood, which is a Christmas treat peppermint. As in my peppermint stick, which you can affix your own meaning to that. And Sergei did play that one. I don't think he quite got it, though. But it's got other classics like Santa Came on a Nuclear Missile and The Rocking Disco Santa Claus. And mine's a promo copy. But unfortunately, I haven't looked in a while. Maybe it's come back, but it was out of print, and it was fetching some good money on the collector's market. But by the same token, I believe it's available for download and for streaming, so it's still accessible, hopefully. Admittedly, I didn't look before making this. Now, this next thing, I've gotten lots of requests to cover it on Archive, and I'm very reluctant to do so because Sony picked up the rights to the catalog at some point and fairly recently, and it's a bit of a landmine as to what is Sony enforcing or not enforcing, or are they putting in the system, and did they really even get all of it? So I'm kind of hesitant, but I do have a decent amount of the material at this point, but some of it has found its way to CD from the Seeburg Music Library. And Seeburg was a Muzak system, a pretty early one, and Tecmone has the definitive video on Seeburg. But yeah, this is Kmart music, 60s and 70s Kmart music. It is just pure cheese Muzak. But yeah, if you're looking for something a little more simultaneously cheesy but nice, I guess you could say, to put on around the holidays, there you go. And I'm pretty sure this is still in print. All right, so let's get to a bit of simultaneously nostalgia and just stuff that I do enjoy for the most part. So when I was a kid, I've got the cassette that my mom had when I was a kid. But one of the things she would always put on around the holidays and on Christmas morning was the cassette version of this. Billboard Greatest Christmas Hits, 1955 to present. Now, this came out in 1989, but the songs run out in 1983. So present, even back then, was a little iffy. They really could have just called it 55 to 83, and I don't think anyone would have bat an eye. But at the same time, this is kind of a rare misfire from Rhino Records. And this was Rhino at its peak here, late 80s, early 90s. So usually they were so diligent about getting the original hits of everything. But in this case, they failed on 2 of the 10 cuts. So The Little Drummer Boy, Harry Simeone Chorale, is a re-recording from just like 3 years after the original, but it is not the original hit. And then, to me, the egregious one is Please Come Home for Christmas, Charles Brown, one of my favorite Christmas tunes. I'm good with the Eagles version too, but I prefer Charles Brown. But it's not his original from 1958, I believe. It's a re-recording from 1972 or 3, I believe. But yeah, it is not the original hit. It's still decent and everything, and Brown sounds okay, but yeah, not the real deal, so to speak. But it hasn't stopped me from throwing this on like every other Christmas. And also you get to hear Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer without having to endure the rest of the Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer album, which I do have. And that was a song I was strangely attached to as a kid. I was a weird kid, but I think you've gathered that. So there was another one in the series, Greatest Christmas Hits 1935 to 54. My mom had the cassette of this as well. I don't know where that cassette is today. But obviously I have it on CD now. And these are both out of print, but they're pretty common. They sold a ton of copies, and I've seen them in the thrift store bins, even here in South Dakota. So it's not too obscure. But in this case, I think it's all original. I'm not as big a connoisseur of 30s and 40s music, but yeah, in this case, they got it right. But it's very short. You know, these Billboard CDs are only 10 songs a piece, and generally the farther back you go, the shorter they are. So I think this one's only like 25 minutes. But they're a great reason to have this one. All I Want for Christmas Is My Two Front Teeth, Spike Jones, which only seems to intermittently appear on the Spike Jones compilations. It's kind of weird. But yeah, if you want to get back to the original Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and, you know, the real standards, you know, here are where they came from. Oh, getting back to my rant about White Christmas, it is the 1947 White Christmas on here, contrary to what the date says. All right, let's get back into the weird stuff, if only momentarily. And this is, strangely enough, one of my favorite Christmas albums, and it's unfortunately out of print and kind of valuable. It may be available for download, but Tales from the Crypt, Have Yourself a Scary Little Christmas, featuring such classics as We Wish You'd Bury the Missus, as opposed to We Wish You a Merry Christmas, or around specifically New Year's, Should Old Cadavers Be Forgot? Because we're all going to that big party that is death. And some other good ones, Deck the Halls with Parts of Charlie. And this does have the infamous Christmas rap on it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess this is just, in a way, a bit of my brand of humor. It's all the cheesy but macabre stuff you would expect out of the Crypt Keeper. And it is indeed John Kassir, I think that's how you say his name, voicing it. So it is the Crypt Keeper singing all of this. And to his credit, he sings it really well. I mean, he carries those tunes really well while staying in character and still doing the Crypt Keeper voice. He just absolutely nails it. All right, so let's swing the pendulum back towards more the serious stuff here. I picked this up not too long before I left Colorado, but it very quickly became one of my favorites. Have a Merry Chess Christmas. And of course, Chess being the legendary blues / R&B / gospel label out of Chicago. And in this case, it's a short, all too short compilation, under half an hour. Everything here is from the 50s through the early 70s. But to me, it's kind of just one winner after another. The only downside is the sound quality is pretty bad. Very low levels and very flat sound. Normally I'm okay with the quiet ones, just crank it a bit, but yeah, like the frequency response on this is not so hot. But you do have one hit on here, Run Rudolph Run, from Chuck Berry. But you also get his Merry Christmas Baby, his blues on there. And you get up into the early 70s with the OJs on there, another favorite of mine. And Hey Santa Claus, which if you're familiar with National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, that song's on there. So yeah, I think this is out of print, but it's not too tough to find. And even then, the individual songs should be available for streaming and so on pretty easily. All right, so here's another favorite Christmas album of mine, but I consider it a bit of a technicality, but it is one that I can handle from end to end, which is something I can't say for very many Christmas albums. The Ventures Christmas album, so kind of America's premier instrumental rock group. But the trick with The Ventures is it's always a Ventures record. It's always going to kind of sound the same. So even if there's some great theme to it, it's always in that basic zone. So in this case, yeah, they're doing all the holiday tunes, but it's really just a normal old Ventures album just with sleigh tambourine on it. And some of them are done in such a Ventures style that they truly don't even sound like Christmas songs anymore. So I guess in a way you could fool people with this one, have a Christmas music without it really entirely being Christmas music. All right, so this next one, it's a stray cassette, but I picked up a copy of this on a thrifting episode a few years ago now, and I already had it. It's only ever been on cassette and vinyl. I'm not entirely sure about the vinyl, actually, but certainly cassette, obviously. I've got it. But I had one of the sides was kind of dodgy on it, so I found another. Well, that one has a dodgy side on it too, but thankfully one's got a good side 1 and one's got a good side 2, so I was able to put together my own little CD here. But if I peel back the Post-it note on one copy, Warner Brothers Records presents A Christmas Tradition from 1987, and we're going into country territory for the most part with this one. I'd say 8 out of the 10 songs would really be country. So in this case, coming from Colorado, I'm sure it's still that way now, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Colorado Christmas, Steve Goodman cover was, and I'm sure still is, just a staple on the radio there during the holidays, be it the soft rock station or the classic rock station or the country station or whatever. But when that first came out in 1983, it was on a 45 only, and I think it was a split 45, so it would be a different artist on the other side and a completely unrelated thing. But this, as far as I know, is the only reissue that original 1983 recording has ever had. So sometime in the mid to late 90s, they went back and re-recorded it, and that's the version that's become the standard bearer. And when you do hear it on the radio, that's the version, and it's the one that appears on the compilation albums and so forth. But yeah, if you want the original, you either have to find a 45 or this. Unfortunately, you're stuck with a needle drop either way. It's a needle drop on here. It took me a while to figure it out, thanks to the bad side on my first copy. But yeah, so that's a little disappointing. That tells me, even though it was only 4 years old at the time, that the master tape must have gone missing or got recorded over or something. Now, the only other, I personally consider Nitty Gritty Dirt Band more rock, but we can argue on that one. There is an Everly Brothers tune on here, them doing Silent Night, and it's a pretty sketchy run through it with a choir. It sounds like it was a one-take wonder, and it also kind of sounds like a needle drop as well. But at the very least, it's not from the original tapes. It's just not a great way to end the compilation, or the side, I think. Oh no, it's next to last on the side, excuse me. But otherwise, a lot of stuff that never appeared anywhere else. This has never been reissued, so it is one to keep an eye out for. All right, this next one isn't even an album, it's an EP, but I really should cover this one. And I actually used one of the songs from this as the theme to one of my early Christmas episodes. So it was a tune called Christmas is for Mugs, as in, mugs and thugs, as opposed to like mugs of coffee or hot chocolate or whatever. But it's from this. Graham Parker's Christmas Cracker. And I guess you could look at that in two ways. So either, well, Graham Parker is British, so the Christmas cracker that you pull apart. Or if you're American, haha, a graham cracker. But anyway, yeah, Christmas is for Mugs is just Graham at his misanthropic best. But then it's a little more... I don't know, heartfelt than you'd normally get out of him. So New Year's Revolution, which is really more of a platitude, but a good one. And Soul Christmas, in which he got one of the members of LaBelle to help out. And it's a bit of a holiday fantasy. So yeah, there are demo versions. They're not really all that noteworthy. I kind of wish he had just kept it to the 3 songs, but oh well. Yeah, I don't think this one is available at all anymore. So hopefully somebody's posted it to YouTube. I don't know. Maybe it is available for download. I didn't look. I didn't research this one at all. All right, so let's head back into R&B territory here. So this one on paper should be one of my absolute favorites, but it was just not very well put together, and some of it just really does not work. But the good stuff is great. Unfortunately, this thing is just loaded with problems. 24 greatest R&B Christmas hits on Gusto, and we've had our run-ins with them on record ripoffs, haven't we? Now, that's not to say these aren't original or original-ish recordings, but these all come from the King Records library, the legendary R&B label. But it's almost entirely needle drops, and not very good needle drops. And there's no liner notes to this thing. It's very sloppily put together. And this thing is from 2007, but it is, I believe, out of print now. And the programming makes no sense whatsoever. So you do have both sides of, say, Lowell Fulson's Lonesome Christmas, but they're in completely disparate spots on the album. And frustratingly, a lot of these songs have appeared elsewhere from the original tapes, and yeah, this just is so poorly put together. But I did pull some songs from it for my iPod, and otherwise a good chunk of it I've got from other sources. But yeah, this should have been an absolute slam dunk of a release. Oh well. All right, last thing, and I definitely need to single this block of 5 albums out. I won't go through all of them. But it's fairly well known that my day job for almost a decade was just being an AV dude, I guess you could say. I was a stage crew member, I did hotel AV, I did all that sort of stuff for 9 years. And actually a little more before that, but continuously for that period. And every year around the holidays, no matter what was going on, whether it was a play or a corporate event or whatever, we'd always have to do Christmas music, and it always had to be the same old crap. And I mean crap, in my opinion. Michael Bolton's Christmas, Kenny G's Christmas, all that sort of stuff. So when nobody was around, at least if I was in charge, 2 things would go on the sound system when nobody was around. Black Sabbath and the Bob Rivers Christmas albums. So I've got all 5 of them here, from starting in 1987 up through, I believe, 2003. And he has since retired. But let me single out this one. certainly. Chipmunks roasting on an open fire. And in case you haven't gotten the hint yet, if you're not familiar with Bob Rivers, yeah, they're called Twisted Christmas for a reason. A lot of it's pretty tasteless. There are some nice moments on these, but generally it's cathartic as far as I'm concerned. It's, as I mentioned, like with the Paul Revere album, it's what you put on when everybody's been a jerk all day. So in the case of Chipmunks roasting, you really do kind of need to have the Twisted Chipmunk song first, because otherwise Chipmunks roasting just seems like wanton violence. But no, the Chipmunks deserved it. You just have to listen. So anyway, I just had to get that little shout out. They do play on the classic rock station around the holidays, I Am Santa Claus, as opposed to Iron Man, I Am Iron Man, Black Sabbath. There's a Jethro Tull parody on one of these, and a Joan Jett pastiche on one. There's one that's I really love. It's a parody of Me and Mrs. Jones, the great R&B tune from the early 70s, Billy Paul, Me and Mrs. Claus. Or as opposed to Santa Claus is Coming to Town by way of Bruce Springsteen, Santa Claus is Fooling Around, and it's about infidelity. And, well, yeah, you got an idea. So anyway, I think that's going to do it for this one. So I'm going to shut up now, and otherwise I'll talk to you again soon.